Hello, ciao, and welcome to our fourth installment of Tuesday Tales of Terror. How is everyone doing? We did skip last week. I was traveling. I I apologize. But you know what? I have to keep telling myself that this was always meant to just be something fun for me. And if I turn it into something that I don't enjoy, then I won't be doing it anymore at all. So rather than do that, put pressure on myself, I'm going to allow myself to have time off. That being said, I hope that the last 2 weeks have been really wonderful for you. I washed my hair last night. Oh, yes. That's where these voluptuous curls are coming from. First time washing my hair since March. Yeah. Hippie through and through. But, well, washing it with water. Anyway, this evening, I thought it would be fun if we ventured into one of my absolute favorite authors, Ray Bradbury. And I wanted to read this one called The Skeleton. Oh, that's why I can't find it, because I'm looking at the wrong page on the table of contents. This is one of my favorite stories. Oh, that's not going to do. Excuse me, I'm going to have to shut my window. Yes? Well, can you wait like half an hour? Because if I feed you right now, you're going to eat right now. Okay, thank you. All right. Hydrate, the usual. We're back to the potato head cup. I don't know, I just rotate through the plastic cups that we have in the cupboards. Let us begin. Skeleton, one of my favorite stories. It was past time for him to see the doctor again. Mr. Harris turned palely in at the stairwell, and on his way up the flight saw Dr. Burley's name gilded over a pointing arrow. Would Dr. Burley sigh when he walked in? After all, this would make the 10th trip so far this year. But Burley shouldn't complain. He was paid for the examinations. The nurse looked Mr. Harris over and smiled, a bit amusedly, as she tiptoed to the glazed glass door, opened it, and put her head in. Harris thought he heard her say, "Guess who's here, doctor?" And didn't the doctor's voice reply faintly, "Oh, my God, again?" Harris swallowed uneasily. When Harris walked in, Dr. Burley snorted. "Makes no bones again? Ah!" He scowled and adjusted his glasses. "My dear Harris, you've been curried with the finest toothed combs and bacteria brushes known to science. You're just nervous. Let's see your fingers. Too many cigarettes. Let's smell your breath. Too much protein. Let's see your eyes. Not enough sleep. My response? Go to bed, stuff the protein, no smoking, and $10, please." Harris stood sulking. The doctor glanced up from his papers. "You still here? You're a hypochondriac, Harris. That's $11 now." "But why should my bones ache?" asked Harris. Dr. Burley spoke as to a child. "You ever had a sore muscle and kept irritating it? Fussing with it, rubbing it. Gets worse the more you bother it. Then you leave it alone and the pain vanishes. Realize you caused most of the soreness yourself. Well, son, that's what's with you. Leave yourself alone. Take a dose of salts. Get out of here and take that trip to Phoenix you've stewed about for months. Do you good to travel." 5 minutes later, Mr. Harris riffled through a classified phone directory at the corner druggist's, a fine lot of sympathy one got from blind fools like Burley. He passed his finger down a list of bone specialists, found one named M. Monaghan. Monaghan lacked an M.D. or any other academic lettering behind his name, but his office was conveniently near, 3 blocks down, 1 block over. M. Monaghan, like his office, was small and dark. Like his office, he smelled of iodine, and other odd things. He was a good listener, though, and listened with eager, shiny moves of his eyes, and when he talked to Harris, his accent was such that he softly whistled each word, undoubtedly because of imperfect dentures. Harris told all. M. Monaghan nodded. He had seen cases like this before. The bones of the body. Man was not aware of his bones. Ah, yes, the bones. The skeleton, most difficult, something concerning an imbalance, an unsympathetic coordination between soul, flesh, and skeleton. Very complicated, softly whistled M. Monaghan. Harris listened, fascinated. Now here was a doctor who understood his illness. Psychological, said M. Monaghan. He moved swiftly, delicately to a dingy wall and slashed down 6 X-rays to haunt the room with their look of things found floating in an ancient tide. Here, the skeleton surprised. Here, luminous portraits of the long, the short, the large, the small bones. Mr. Harris must be aware of his position, his problem. M. Monaghan's hand tapped, rattled, whispered, scratched at faint nebula of flesh in which hung ghosts of cranium, spinal cord, pelvis, lime, calcium, marrow, here, there, this, that, these, those, and others. Look! Harris shuddered. The X-rays and the paintings blew in a green and phosphorescent wind from a land peopled by the monsters of Dolly and Fuseli. M. Monaghan whistled quietly. Did Mr. Harris wish his bones treated? That depends, said Harris. Well, M. Monaghan could not help Harris unless Harris was in the proper mood. Psychologically, one had to need help, or the doctor was useless. But M. Monaghan would try. Harris lay on a table with his mouth open. The lights were switched off, the shades drawn. M. Monaghan approached his patient. Something touched Harris's tongue. He felt his jaw bones forced out. They creaked and made faint cracking noises. My jaw cracks too. It's very annoying. One of the skeleton charts on the dim wall seemed to quiver and jump. A violent shudder seized Harris. Involuntarily, his mouth snapped shut. M. Monaghan shouted, "Ah!" His nose had almost been bitten off. No use, no use. Now was not the time. M. Monaghan whispered, the shades up, dreadfully disappointed. When Mr. Harris felt he could cooperate psychologically, when Mr. Harris really needed help and trusted M. Monaghan to help him, then maybe something could be done. M. Monaghan held out his little hand. In the meantime, the fee was only $2. Mr. Harris must begin to think. Here was a sketch for Mr. Harris to take home and study. It would acquaint him with his body. He must be tremblingly aware of himself. He must be on guard. Skeletons were strange, unwieldy things. M. Monaghan's eyes glittered. Good day to Mr. Harris. Oh, and would he care for a breadstick? M. Monaghan preferred a jar of long, hard, salty breadsticks to Harris, taking one himself, saying that chewing breadsticks kept him in practice. Good day to Mr. Harris. And Mr. Harris went home. The next day, Sunday, Mr. Harris discovered innumerable fresh aches and pains in his body. He spent the morning, his eyes fixed, staring with new interest at the small, anatomically perfect painting of a skeleton M. Monaghan had given him. His wife, Clarice, startled him at dinner when she cracked her exquisitely thin knuckles one by one until he clasped his hands. I can't crack my knuckles right now. Well, tried to do it for effect, but well. Until he clapped his hands to his ears and cried, "Stop!" The rest of the afternoon he quarantined himself in his room. Clarice played bridge in the parlor, laughing and chatting with 3 other ladies, while Harris, hidden away, fingered and weighed the limbs of his body with growing curiosity. After an hour he suddenly rose and called, "Clarice!" She had a way of dancing into any room, her body doing all sorts of soft, agreeable things to keep her feet from ever quite touching the nap of a rug. She excused herself from her friends and came to see him now, brightly. She found him reseated in a far corner, and she saw that he was staring at the anatomical sketch. "Are you still brooding, sweet?" she asked. "Please don't." She sat upon his knees. Her beauty could not distract him now in his absorption. He juggled her lightness. He touched her kneecap suspiciously. It seemed to move under her pale, glowing skin. "Oh, is it supposed to do that?" he asked, sucking in his breath. "Is it supposed to do what?" She laughed. "You mean my kneecap?" "Is it supposed to run around on top of your knee that way?" She experimented. "So it does," she marveled. "Oh, I'm glad yours slithers too," he sighed. "I was beginning to worry." "About what?" He patted his ribs. "My ribs don't go all the way down. They stop here. And I've found some confounded ones dangle in midair." Beneath the curve of her small breasts, Clarice clasped her hands. "Of course, silly. Everybody's ribs stop at a given point. And those funny short ones are floating ribs." "Oh, I hope they don't float around too much." The joke was most uneasy. Now, above all, he wished to be alone. Further discoveries, newer and stranger archaeological diggings, lay within the reach of his trembling hands, and he did not wish to be laughed at. "Thanks for coming in, dear," he said. "Any time." She rubbed her small nose softly against his. "Wait, here now." He put his finger to touch his nose and hers. "Did you realize? The nose bone grows down only this far. From there on, a lot of gristly tissue fills out the rest." She wrinkled hers. "Of course, darling." And she danced from the room. Now, sitting alone, he felt the perspiration rise from the pools and hollows of his face to flow in a thin tide down his cheeks. He licked his lips and shut his eyes. Now, next on the agenda. What? The spinal cord. Yes, here. Slowly he examined it, in the same way he operated the many push buttons in his office, thrusting them to summon secretaries, messengers. But now, in these pushings of his spinal column, fears and terrors answered, rushed from a million doors in his mind to confront and shake him. His spine felt horribly unfamiliar. Like the brittle shards of a fish freshly eaten, its bones left strewn on a cold china platter. He seized the little round nubbins. "Lord! Lord!" His teeth began to chatter. "God Almighty!" he thought. "Why haven't I realized it? All these years I've gone around with a skeleton inside of me. How is it we take ourselves for granted? How is it we never question our bodies and our being? A skeleton. One of those jointed, snowy, hard things. One of those foul, dry, brittle, gouge-eyed, skull-faced, shake-fingered, rattling things that sway from neck chains in abandoned webbed closets. One of those things found on the desert, all long and scattered like dice. He stood upright because he could not bear to remain seated. "Inside me now," he grasped his stomach, his head. "Inside my head is a skull." One of those curved, carapaces which holds my brain like an electric jelly. One of those cracked shells with the holes in front like two holes shot through it by a double-barreled shotgun, with its grottos and caverns of bone, revetments and placements for my flesh, my smelling, my seeing, my hearing, my thinking. A skull encompassing my brain, allowing it exit through its brittle windows to see the outside world. He wanted to dash into the bridge party, upset it, a fox in a chicken yard, the cards fluttering all around like chicken feathers burst upward in clouds. He stopped himself only with a violent, trembling effort. Now, man, control yourself. This is a revelation. Take it for what it's worth, understand it, savor it. But a skeleton! Screamed his subconscious. I won't stand for it. It's vulgar. It's terrible. It's frightening. Skeletons are horrors. They clink and tinkle and rattle in old castles hung from oaken beams, making long, indolently rustling pendulums on the wind. Darling, will you come meet the ladies? His wife's clear, sweet voice called from far away. Mr. Harris stood. His skeleton held him up. This thing inside, this invader, this horror, was supporting his arms, leg, and head. It was like feeling someone just behind you who shouldn't be there. With every step, he realized how dependent he was on this other thing. Darling, I'll be with you in a moment, he called weakly. To himself he said, come on, brace up. You've got to go back to work tomorrow. Friday, you must make that trip to Phoenix. It's a long drive, hundreds of miles. Must be in shape for that trip or you won't get Mr. Crowden to invest in your ceramics business. Chin up now. Ceramics. A moment later, he stood among the ladies, being introduced to Mrs. Withers, Mrs. Abelmat, and Miss Curthy, all of whom had skeletons inside them, but took it very calmly, because nature had carefully clothed the bare nudity of clavicle, tibia, and femur with breasts, thighs, calves, and coiffure and eyebrows satanic, with bees-stung lips, and Lord, shouted Mr. Harris inwardly, when they talk or eat, part of their skeleton shows, their teeth. I never even thought of that. Excuse me, he gasped, and ran from the room only in time to drop his lunch among the petunias over the garden balustrade. Why did he run out to the garden to throw up? Why didn't he run to the bathroom? Over the garden balustrade. Where are we? Okay, let's keep going. That night, seated on the bed as his wife undressed, he prepared his toenails and fingernails scrupulously. These parts, too, were where his skeleton was shoving, indignantly growing out. He must have muttered part of this theory, because next thing he knew, his wife, in negligee, was on the bed, her arms about his neck, yawning. Oh, my darling, fingernails are not bone. They're only hardened epidermis. He threw the scissors down. Oh, are you certain? I hope so. I'd feel better. He looked down at the curve of her body, marveling. I hope all people are made the same way. If you aren't the darndest hypochondriac. She held him at arm's length. Come on. What's wrong? Tell Mama. Something inside me, he said. Something I ate. The next morning and all afternoon at his downtown office, Mr. Harris sorted out the sizes, shapes, and constructions of various bones in his body with displeasure. At 10 a.m., he asked to feel Mr. Smith's elbow one moment. Mr. Smith obliged, but scowled suspiciously. And after lunch, Mr. Harris had to ask to touch Miss Laurel's shoulder blade, and she immediately pushed herself back against him, purring like a kitten and shutting her eyes. "Miss Laurel," he snapped. "Stop that!" Alone, he pondered his neuroses. The war was just over. The pressure of his work, the uncertainty of the future probably had much to do with his mental outlook. He wanted to leave the office, get into business for himself. He had more than a little talent for ceramics and sculptures. As soon as possible, he'd head for Arizona, borrow that money from Mr. Crowden, build a kiln, and set up shop. It was a worry. What a case he was. But luckily, he had contacted M. Munigant. He would fight it out with himself, not go back to either Munigant or Dr. Burley unless he was forced to. The alien feeling would pass. He sat staring into space. Hold on, I'm just going to check and see really quick. I might not be able to finish this tonight. It's okay, let's keep going. The alien feeling did not pass. It grew. On Tuesday and Wednesday, it bothered him terrifically that his epidermis, hair, and other appendages were of a high disorder, while this integumented skeleton within was a slick, clean structure of efficient organization. Sometimes in certain lights, with his lips drawn morosely down, weighted with melancholy, he imagined he saw his skull grinning at him behind the flesh. "Let go," he cried. "Let go of me. My lungs. Stop!" He gasped convulsively, as if his ribs were crushing the breath from him. "My brain! Stop squeezing it!" And terrifying headaches burnt his brain to a blind cinder. "My insides! Let them be, for God's sake! Stay away from my heart!" His heart cringed from the fanning motion of his ribs like pale spiders crouched and fiddling with their prey. Drenched with sweat, he lay upon the bed one night while Clarice was out attending a Red Cross meeting. He tried to gather his wits, but only grew more aware of the conflict between his dirty exterior and this beautiful, cool, clean, calciumed thing inside. His complexion, wasn't it oily and lined with worry? Observe the flawless, snow-white perfection of the skull. His nose, wasn't it too large? Then observe the tiny bones of the skull's nose before that monstrous nasal cartilage begins forming the lopsided proboscis. His body, wasn't it plump? Well, consider the skeleton, slender, svelte, economical of line and contour, exquisitely carved oriental ivory, perfect, thin as white, a praying mantis. His eyes, weren't they protuberant, ordinary, numb-looking? Be so kind as to note the eye sockets of the skull, so deep and rounded, somber, quiet pools, all-knowing, eternal. Gaze deep, and you never touch the bottom of their dark understanding. All irony, all life, all everything is there in the cupped darkness. Compare, compare, compare. He raged for hours, and the skeleton, ever the frail and solemn philosopher, hung quietly inside, saying not a word, suspended like a delicate insect within a chrysalis, waiting and waiting. Harris sat slowly up. Wait a minute. Hold on," he exclaimed. "You're helpless, too. I've got you, too. I can make you do anything I want. You can't prevent it. I can say move your carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges, and up they go as I wave to someone." He laughed. "I order the fibula and femur to locomote, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, we walk around the block. There." Harris grinned. "It's 50-50 fight. Even Stephen, and we'll fight it out, we two. After all, I'm the part that thinks. Yes, by God, yes. Even if I didn't have you, I could still think." Instantly, a tiger's jaw snapped shut, chewing his brain in half. Harris screamed. Ah! The bones of his skull grabbed hold and gave him nightmares. Then slowly, while he shrieked, nuzzled and ate the nightmares one by one until the last one was gone and the light went out. At the end of the week, he postponed the Phoenix trip because of his health. Weighing himself on a penny scale, he saw the slow gliding red arrow point to 165. He groaned. Why, I've weighed 175 for years. I can't have lost 10 pounds. He examined his cheeks in the fly-dotted mirror. Cold, primitive fear rushed over him in odd little shivers. You! I know what you're about, you! He shook his fist at his bony face, particularly addressing his remarks to his superior maxillary, his inferior maxillary, to his cranium, and to his cervical vertebrae. You damn thing, you! You think you can starve me? Make me lose weight, eh? Peel the flesh off, leave nothing but skin on bone? Trying to ditch me so you can be supreme, huh? No! He fled into a cafeteria. Turkey, dressing, creamed potatoes, 4 vegetables, 3 desserts. He could eat none of it. He was sick to his stomach. He forced himself. His teeth began to ache. Bad teeth, is it? He thought angrily. I'll eat in spite of every tooth clanging and banging and rattling so they fall in my gravy. His head blazed. His breath jerked in and out of a constricted chest. His teeth raged with pain. But he knew one small victory. He was about to drink milk when he stopped and poured it into a vase of nasturtiums. Why? No calcium for you, my boy. No calcium for you. Never again shall I eat foods with calcium or other bone-fortifying minerals. I'll eat for one of us, not both, my lad. 150 pounds, he said the following week to his wife. Do you see how I've changed? For the better, said Clarice. You were always a little plump for your height, darling. She stroked his chin. I like your face. So much nicer. The lines of it are so firm and strong now. They're not my lines. They're his, damn him. You mean to say you like him better than you like me? Who's him? In the parlor mirror beyond Clarice, his skull smiled back at him behind his fleshy grimace of hatred and despair. Fuming, he popped malt tablets into his mouth. This was one way of gaining weight when you couldn't keep other foods down. Clarice noticed the malt pellets. But, darling, really? You don't have to regain the weight for me, she said. Oh, shut up, he felt like saying. She made him lie with his head in her lap. Darling, she said, I've watched you lately. You're so badly off. You don't say anything, but you look hunted. You toss in bed at night. Maybe you should go to a psychiatrist. But I think I can tell you everything he would say. I've put it all together from hints you've let escape you. I can tell you that you and your skeleton are one and the same. One nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. United you stand, divided you fall. If you two fellows can't get along like an old married couple in the future, go back and see Dr. Burley. But first, relax. You're in a vicious circle. The more you worry, the more your bones stick out, the more you worry. After all, who picked this fight? You or that anonymous entity you claim is lurking around behind your alimentary canal? He closed his eyes. I did. I guess I did. Go on, Clarice. Keep talking. Oh, you rest now, she said softly. Rest and forget. Mr. Harris felt buoyed up for half a day. Then he began to sag. Where are we? Ooh, I don't think we have time. I think we're going to have to stop there. Yep, that's the end. Tragedy. We did not get to his Phoenix trip. We're going to have to save that for next time. But I do believe that we'll finish it next time because we are exactly halfway through, so that works out very conveniently. I'm going to get my handy dandy pencil, of course, and leave us a little marking. And then I have something around here that I can use as some... Oh, there's my pencil right there. What? I don't declare that was there earlier. Well, thank you, fairies. That's very convenient, isn't it? And let's get the thing. Ah! And there's a bookmark. The ground provides. Okay, my lovelies, my beautiful creatures, my little friends. I do hope that you have a lovely evening. I hope that you have a magical week, that something wonderful happens to you, and that at the end of the day, you remember the most important thing is to be you. Anyway, I love you. Peace. Love. Mwah. Stay spooky. Ciao.